Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting. I'm going to give it just one more minute because there's a couple more parents joining and then we'll get started. Right then, I don't think there's anyone else joining, so I'll just get going. Firstly, welcome. Thank you so much for giving up your time this evening to join this meeting. For the benefit of anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Susie Green and I have the privilege of being the head of sixth form at Finnan Park School. And the purpose of this meeting is to share information with parents about how best to support your child if your child wants to put in an early entry application. I'll talk a bit about what that is in a minute, but the early entry process is very rigorous and can be quite brutal. And it's really important that parents support their children if they are going to have a chance of success down one of these pathways. So I thought it would be super helpful for you to have a bit of information shared at this stage, so we've got a good year for those children to be able to get some support. Firstly, this meeting is being recorded. Hopefully you saw that from the email I sent out. I will monitor the chat throughout. So you can ask any questions, but please note that if you type a question in the chat, it will appear in the recording. So if you're not comfortable with that, then you can email me questions separately, which I'll respond to over the next few days. So anyway, I'll get straight on. Firstly, early entry, what does it mean? So if your child wants to apply for university, and if you're on this meeting, I'm assuming they do, there are two deadlines. The main deadline for the vast majority of university applications is in January, meaning that actually our school deadline is a bit earlier than that, but the university applications don't have to be done until January of year 13. However, if your child wants to apply for early entry, in other words, they either want to apply for a course at the University of Oxford, the University of Cambridge, that could be any course, or they want to apply for veterinary medicine or dentistry at any university, they have to submit their application by an early entry window. We don't have the date yet for next year, but it's usually about the 13th or 14th of October. Now, as you can tell, that's a lot earlier than most universities, meaning they need to be very, very organised, and the majority of the preparation for their application needs to be done in year 12. So, firstly, before we go any further, huge disclaimer. These courses are the most competitive courses that there are. Whoever's just joined, could you mute yourself, please? So anyway, these are the most competitive courses that there are, really, and they are not right for everybody. But if your child wants to apply for an early entry place successfully, then it's really important they start to prepare. So full disclosure, I went to the University of Oxford, and I can tell you from first-hand experience that it was probably the most amazing experience of my life, but it was also the hardest. It is an incredibly rigorous and robust academic experience, very different to standard university life. And there are lots of aspects of standard university life that students will not get if they pursue one of these pathways. Now, obviously, I've not studied medicine, veterinary medicine, or dentistry, but I've done a lot of research about them in my role as head of sixth form, and I understand they're very similar in terms of the academic rigour. So do be aware that an awful lot of what students need to be doing over the next year is thinking about whether this is actually right for them, because these pathways are hard and they are brutal. And if they're right for a child, they will have the most amazing time. But if they're wrong for them, then we do find there's quite a high dropout rate, and quite a lot of students apply again because it's just not good for their mental health. And after a year, they decide to continue a different course. But anyway, that's what early entry is. So firstly, if your child wants to pursue early entry, they are going to have a tough year for a lot of reasons. It's going to be hard work. And I thought at this point it would be sensible to remind you of the support available. So firstly, your child's mentor would always be the first port of call. And I would say it is a good idea for your child to inform their mentor if they want to apply early entry, so that their mentor can keep an eye out for them now. Secondly, Miss Armitage is our wellbeing officer in the sixth form. She's amazing. Mrs. Davis is a great resource for this specifically because she used to work at Coventry University and she was an admissions tutor and a professor of psychology. So she understands a lot about the university systems. Mrs. Gossel, Mr. Shepherd and myself are the head of sixth form, assistant heads of sixth form. Laura Mitchell's our counsellor. Students can self-refer to see the counsellor at any point. Mrs. Hook's our careers advisor and Mr. Jeffries is our exams manager. Quite a lot of the courses that we're talking about today will have an admissions test. And so it's quite possible that your child will need to see Mr. Jeffries to talk about exams. So it's important that they work out who he is if they don't know him. Right. So this is the application process. Firstly, students need to submit the UCAS application form, and that will be in mid-October. The UCAS application form consists of 3 main parts. The first part is just information. It takes a while to fill in and it's fiddly, but it's quite boring. It's things like name, address, date of birth, all of that sort of stuff. The second part and longest part is the personal statement. Now, we will support children to write their personal statement. We will have a lot of time doing that in school, particularly in the summer. We have a full 2-day careers conference, and one of the major focuses of that careers conference is writing the personal statement. But if your child is applying for early entry, they need to start thinking about that now. Any child who does my enrichment that I run as part of the Wednesday afternoon enrichment about applying for Oxford or Cambridge will get support with this from me as well. But that's the first thing to think about. And then the third part is the reference, which we will write from school. I'll talk a little bit more about the reference later. Now, if your child's applied for Cambridge University, they'll then get a separate application form sent to them, which they have to fill in within a week. Again, not a great deal of problem. It's all quite short answer questions, but just be prepared for that. That's only Cambridge University. And then there's a period of time where most students will have to do admissions tests. This is definitely the case for medicine, dentistry and veterinary medicine, and most but not all courses at Oxford or Cambridge have an admissions test. Most of those you can do at school. Mr. Jeffries organises them, but some of them you will have to go to somewhere like a driving test centre to do. It's important, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, that your child researches whether they will have to do an admissions test and where they'll have to do it, because some of those they have to sign themselves up for quite early. Again, if your child is serious about this application, I recommend they go and see Mr. Jeffries fairly soon, just so that he is aware and they're on his radar for an admissions test application in September or October. Now, quite a lot of courses then require a work submission. This is mostly Oxford and Cambridge, but quite a lot of them will require students to submit schoolwork that they've done, submit maybe a portfolio if it's one of the RT courses, and that has to be done very quickly. Sometimes we have students taken aback because they've not prepared their portfolio. For example, if your child is applying for, say, architecture, as soon as they've submitted their application, they'll be asked to send the portfolio. It's really important they work on that portfolio before their application, because otherwise they won't have time to turn it around and make it good enough. Now, every single one of these courses will require an interview. They're normally across November and December. Some of the medicine ones are a bit later, but that's normally when they are. And usually places are offered in January. Again, medicine often a bit later, but that's an approximate timeline. Now, for most university courses, the only part of this the child has to do is the first point. So you will see that the process is significantly more rigorous for these courses than most students will have to go through, which is why we want to start the process now. So the first and most important thing that we must do is support your child to get their personal statement right. If they don't get their personal statement right, probably half of the applications get rejected at the first stage. So if I just go back to the previous slide, about half the applications get rejected at the first point. And therefore, that personal statement must be absolutely brilliant to make sure the child has the opportunity to do the admissions test, submit the work, things like that. So we will ask all early entry students to submit a full first draft of their personal statement before the summer holiday. We'll want a second draft on the third day back and a third draft at the end of September. Now, obviously, if they miss these deadlines, we will